when you run the equations back, you generate this entity that pumps out universes, possibly an infinite number of universes. It just pumps them out. And we call that the multiverse, a term that's just been uptook
by Marvel, comics.
And not only Marvel, but of course, Rick and Morty.
Right.
So anyhow, so the multiverse is there for what might have been around before the Big Bang. But that just moves the question back. Where'd the multiverse come from?
Yeah, it just keeps
yeah.
going
So
and going
that plagues origins questions.
Right.
And by the way, it somehow doesn't plague religious people.
Well, I was just going to say it's sort of, we're not even talking about the theory that God created everything. There is, it's not science.
Well, it's not a theory,
right,
it's faith that says that.
We're about to see Stephen Meyer comment on that very issue in a way that I think takes the wind out of Tyson's sails. But stick with us, because toward the end of this video, we're going to hear Stephen Meyer answer another charge from Tyson that gets asked all the time, and I think it's going to clear some things up for you. So stick with us, but let's jump in now.
What are your thoughts of this concept of multiple universes?
I love to talk about the multiverse.
Or infinite universes.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it. What we mean by fine-tuning is an ensemble of improbable parameters that work together to accomplish some remarkable outcome or functional or remarkable outcome. That's what, if you see an internal combustion engine, you think it was engineered because it's finely tuned. So common sense. The contrary argument to that, the main one, there have been others, but not even most secular physicists regard them as compelling anymore. The main contrary argument has been the idea of the multiverse. That yes, our universe has this array of jointly improbable parameters that are in that sweet spot, but we just happen to be the lucky one because there's a gabillion other universes out there, and with different combinations of the laws and constants of physics and different initial conditions at the beginning of those universes. So all those things that were just right in our universe are, yes, extremely improbable, but there's so many other universes that the probability of a universe with that set of life-friendly conditions arising somewhere had to arise somewhere, inevitably, and we just happen to be in that lucky universe. And then we are stunned by that, and they call that this observer selection effect. So that's superficially an equally plausible explanation to the fine-tuner argument. And a lot of physicists have told me that they regard the two as a wash. You can believe in a fine-tuner, or you could believe in a multiverse. I think the fine-tuner, we'll call it theistic design argument, provides a better overall explanation, and here's why. For the fine-tuning argument to actually work, there has to be some sort of causal connection between the universes. If all those other universes are just causally disconnected from our own, then nothing that happens in those other universes affects anything that happens in this universe, including whatever events were responsible for setting up the fine-tuning in the first place. And in virtue of that, proponents of the multiverse hypothesis have proposed what they call universe-generating mechanisms. And some are based on something called inflationary cosmology, and others are based on something called string theory. But the idea is that there are mechanisms that would, according to the physics of those two cosmological models, spit out new universes such that we could portray our universe as the lucky winner of a giant cosmic lottery that was produced by a underlying common cause. Okay, fair enough. But it turns out that the cosmological models that give us these universe-generating mechanisms imply that the universe-generating mechanisms themselves must be finely tuned in order to generate new universes. So, and that fine-tuning is ultimately unexplained. There's no underlying physics that explains why that fine-tuning. So in order to explain the fine-tuning, you invoke the multiverse. In order to make the multiverse credible, you invoke universe-generating mechanisms. In order to make the universe-generating mechanisms credible or plausible, you have to presuppose prior unexplained fine-tuning, and you're right back to where you started. And given that fine-tuning in our experience, our uniform and repeated experience, when we find it with a French recipe or an internal combustion engine or a hardware-software combination that works, when we find fine-tuning, it always results from a mind. And since the multiverse hasn't provided a better explanation for that, I think the conclusion of design or an ultimate fine-tuner stands.
Yeah.
So what intrigues me is when I say, well, I don't know what was around before the Big Bang. Something had to be there. Something.
Yes.
I said, well, we got top people working on it. We're working. Give us a chance. It had to be God. And then I say, maybe the universe always was. No, it had to have a beginning. And so it's okay. Well, so what do you say? Well, it was God. And so then I say, well, who created God? Oh, God always was. God was always there. So they allow that within themselves to say God always was, but won't allow the scientists to say maybe the universe always was.
Is that right, though? Do believers have a double standard on this? Well, here's Meyer's answering that question.
If you're positing God as the explanation for the origin of the universe, who created God? And doesn't that therefore render your explanation absurd? And my answer to that is no, that every philosophical system has to posit something as what philosophers sometimes call a primitive, the thing from which everything else came, or in worldview studies, they call it the prime reality. Or in formal reality. Philosophy, they'll talk about the issue of ontology. What is the thing from which everything else came? And the materialists have long had the eternal self-existent thing from which everything else came, the thing that doesn't need explaining. And materialists have long affirmed that matter and energy are those things. And I would say in the aftermath of the great revolution of thought that's taken place in the last 100 years in cosmology, where we have multiple lines of evidence and developments within theoretical physics suggesting that the universe itself, the physical universe, had a beginning, that matter and energy are now a poor candidate to be the thing from which everything else came. They themselves appear to have come into existence a finite time ago, before which, whatever that means, there was no matter and energy to do the causing. They can't be the eternal self-existent thing because they began a finite time ago. They haven't been around forever. And whereas if you posit God, and a God possessing the attributes that, say, Jews and Christians have long ascribed to God, then you are positing the existence of an entity which has precisely the type of attributes that you would need to explain the origin of the physical universe from nothing physical. God is an entity who exists outside of space and time, is immaterial, and is thought to have great power. So if such a being exists, it provides a better explanation. To suppose that such a being exists provides a better explanation for the origin of the universe than does materialism.
Yeah, if God exists as Christians and Jews think about him as existing sans the physical universe, then he doesn't exist in time. And things that are in time or temporal are the only things that require beginnings or endings. It doesn't even make sense to think of something that's not temporal in this way, in that sense. So God doesn't need a beginning. That's probably partly why Meyer thought that this conception of God is one that fits so well with what we understand. But there's so much more to say about this, and I hope that you'll click the video on the screen right now to get it.